David Cooksley has been a personal friend for many, many years. I don't know, it's probably 30 by now, at least. And it's been a real joy because he's not just a smart guy, but he's a really fun guy and a nice guy, real kind person that I think it really goes with what he does for his profession. He's the associate professor of medicine at Griffith University. He's also in the Royal Australian Air Force as a director in an area where basically they deal with pre-hospital. So he gets you, he keeps you alive before you end up in the hospital, and has served in the Royal Australian Air Force. He's served 2 tours of duty. He's been deployed twice to Afghanistan, once to Iraq, and multiple times also just doing retrievals on our coastline to the north and doing humanitarian things. He's worked with the Navy, one of only 3 people that's part of the HEMS, which is the Helicopter Emergency Medicine Unit for England and London, where they actually are allowed to operate on the street for people. So they fly in, hoof it with all the devices, and then he's done open heart surgery on somebody in the street. Like, they don't allow that, I don't think, anywhere else in the world. So it's quite a responsibility, and it's a real honor to have an Anzac here on Anzac weekend. So let's stand and let's give appreciation to David Cooksley. Dr. David Cooksley, Air Force officer. Thank you, David. Come on up here.
Oh, don't fall off the stage.
No, I'll
have to save myself.
You have to save yourself, man.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. So funny. Thank you, Ed. That's very kind. I'm kind of a backseat kind of guy. I don't like being in front of crowds too much. But, you know, it's interesting, isn't it, our titles and how we define ourselves. Please just be seated. I feel embarrassed that you're standing. Yeah, okay. You know, the doctor. And I often remind myself, as well as other people, that we're defined as a human being, not a human doing. And yet so much of what we define ourselves is what we do. It's not that what we do is unimportant or bad, it's just that at the end of the day, the essence of who we are is what really matters. Yeah, wow. And if you want to ever get down to thinking about who you are, just go to a quiet place and strip away all your titles that define you. That might be mum or dad, brother and sister, doctor, nurse, carpenter, pastor, doesn't matter. And relationships. And you strip all those away, and what are you left with? How would you describe yourself? How would you define yourself? Anyway, yeah. 2 things about me. I tend to speak quietly and I tend to mumble. It's a bad combination. So if I do either of those, Ed, please throw something at me. And it's good. It was funny, I was sitting there and I was just thinking about, with Brownie was saying things, the old George Burns line, you know, I'm so pleased to be here. And said, at my age, I should be pleased to be anywhere, but, you know. Okay. Gav, can we get that first slide up? So it's Anzac weekend. I had the honour and privilege of doing the dawn service address yesterday down at Kings Beach. And audience was maybe 3,000 people. And although most of them probably didn't realise that it was a profoundly Christian message, but I wasn't quoting scripture. And so you can have an influence and you can say things that are true and real, and people hear it and it will resonate with their spirit. And I had numerous people come up to me afterwards. I was quite surprised, and talk about how that message had affected them and impacted them. And this is a bit of an unusual service. It's not your typical sort of sermon. And I want to pull on a few threads, a few different areas, and try and weave it together. And then at the end, I'd like to give you the same address that I gave yesterday morning, if that's okay. So the session is titled Christianity and War. It's been said that you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. Whether you want it or not, It can, does, and will come. And we're living in very uncertain times, very threatening times. And I can say that without revealing any significant military briefings. It's common knowledge. And for a Christian, that creates a certain tension, whether we acknowledge it or not. And the subtitle is basically the enduring tension between the gospel of peace and the Prince of Peace and the demands of a real world. And it is a tension, and there isn't any easy answer, which actually means that the questions are real. If we go to the next slide, thanks, Gav. I was blessed to grow up in a Christian home, evangelical Christian home. My parents believed deeply and loved me, which was great. And that was great. You know, it was very interesting. But from my Christian growth, if you like, it was purely concerned with the spiritual. My idea of God was only really interested in your spiritual being, your spiritual welfare. And that was fine. I didn't really think anything of it. It was just the way it was. But I felt very called into medicine. I can say that without doubt, that that's where I was meant to be, and that's what I pursued. And this picture up behind me is Otago Medical School, the main building. They've got quite a few buildings in the campus. This is the original. It's the second oldest medical school in the Southern Hemisphere. Very good education, very traditional. That was the first time I was exposed to ideas that were antithetical to Christianity, openly hostile to Christianity. Medicine isn't based, although Christians have adopted medicine as a way of ministering to people, medicine itself is not Christian. In fact, the underlying presupposition of medicine is the non-existence of the spiritual. It's purely materialistic philosophy. And doctors might talk about the spiritual stuff, and they think of it as a motivating principle rather than an actual real thing. And so in this environment, a pressure cooker, incredible pressure cooker, where you're being assaulted with ideas and people sort of are very anti what you have grown up with. And it was interesting to start to think about, what does it mean to be a Christian here? And there was a major point of revelation, and I took the slide out, but it was of the med school library. And I remember sitting there, I was studying intently, and I remember looking up out the window across the road, and God dropped it on me, bam, out of the blue, completely unexpected, that he was intensely interested in what I was studying. What? Wow. But you're only interested in spiritual things. This is physics and mathematics and chemistry and biology. God, that's not your stuff. And cosmology and beauty and art. And I had grown up with this idea that God was only interested in man. He was way bigger than that. And that really sparked the whole dawning of my thinking of the Christian worldview. How is God applicable to all of life? If you can think something but you can't live it, it's an ideology that becomes an idiotology. There's plenty of those in the world. Okay?
Yeah.
You have to ask the question, can I actually live this in all areas of life? And we have the whole concept of, sacred and secular. And I grew up in this sort of sacred mindset for, God was interested in the sacred and the secular was what man did. Well, if God's sovereign, then God's over everything. There is no sacred and secular. And we have to recover a Christian understanding of every area of life. So what does God say about our political system, our legal system, our education system, science, art? And if God doesn't have something to say on all those things, you can't live it in the true sense of the word lived. And we have this idea, I grew up in my Christian upbringing, the call always was for revival. Pray for revival in the land. We need it. God knows we need it. Revival. It's a starting point. If someone comes into the hospital, cardiac arrest, we've got to revive them. Same thing, revival, bring back life. But if we just left it there and said, well, we've done our job and walk away, you need reformation. When was the last time we heard the call for reformation? Reforming everything back to its God-intended purpose. and so that we become salt and light, reforming influences in the world. So the call for revival should be every day, but the call for reformation should also be profound. And we realise that our job as Christians is not just salvation, which is the revival part, bringing new life, but it's also reformation. If you walk into any church and ask the pastor, not saying you do this, poor Ed, what's the Christian perspective on buying weapons systems? You say, well, there's nothing to do with God. He's only interested in the spiritual. If that's the case, then you can't live your Christianity in the proper sense of the word live. And we find that our Christian belief is built on a pinhead of revelation in which we have to then grow into the entire world. And so these threads that I'm mentioning all sort of tie together. So I want to start at the beginning, Genesis. And as a doctor, I'm not only interested in studying pathology and treating pathology, but I'm very interested in the human condition. I'm interested in people. What is it that makes you human? What makes us do what we do? And I think a lot can be found in this very beginning of the Bible here, Genesis 1:28. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful. Okay, it's productive. And increase in number. I think that's pretty evident. So population's going to grow. Fill the earth. Not going to be contained. You're going to fill the entire earth and subdue it, rule over it, the fish of the sea, birds of the air, and every living creature that moves on the ground. Now, this wasn't a suggestion. This wasn't a hint. This wasn't, hey, guess what I'm thinking? It was direct. I believe that these are core attributes of being human that are programmed into us at a deep level, whether we like it or not. Next slide, thanks, Gav. So the question then becomes, when I look at people and I see these aspects of human nature, the will to dominate, to subjugate, to exert power, to exert control. Every one of us has these attributes to varying degrees. Some very pronounced, some quite subtle, but they're there in each and every one of us. I believe that these flow from that original imprint from God into what it means to be human. The question is, what happens when they're not reconciled to God, used for their God-intended purpose? Go to the next slide, thanks. And I'll make this point. Our nature, so-called, unreconciled to God and not engaged with our God-given intended purpose, can become highly destructive in a fallen world. So those attributes that were intended to bring good can also bring huge destruction. And I think that is tying the thread into why do people want to dominate, subjugate, exert control, bring order? It's our nature. Why do you want more, even if what you have is enough? Because you are commanded to increase. If you're not increasing, it's a curse. It's not that you're greedy, it's just that it's in your nature. The things aren't bad. None of those things are bad. They're only bad if they are stepped outside their God-appointed purpose, not reconciled to God, not being about the way and will of God in all the world. Does that kind of make sense? And I believe this ties directly into the concept of why we see war. Yeah. Okay, go to the next slide, thanks. Yeah. So how do we think about violence and war? And again, this is painting very big brushstrokes on a very complex topic, and it's only just giving ideas, putting stuff out there for you to think about. Okay, next one, thanks, mate. I think we can say clearly that even a cursory read of the New Testament is very clear that Jesus was very anti-violence. You can't have the title Prince of Peace and be engaged in violence. You can't spread the gospel by violent means. Jesus knew that. And there's lots of examples there. Bless those that curse you. Walk the second mile. If you're forced to walk one, walk another. Give your shirt. If someone takes your shirt, give your coat too. Or your coat, give your shirt as well. Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. Man, what a commandment. Love your enemies? Seriously. Jesus on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. At his point of desperate agony, he still wouldn't curse those who were killing him. This is the example that Jesus, and in marked contrast to many other belief systems in the world. I'm not going to mention any names. Next one. This scripture got my attention. You know, it really surprised me. There are a lot of things that have sort of shocked and surprised me, but this one did. And this is Jesus talking to the disciples just before he is crucified. And he basically says to them, like, I've sent you out without anything and you've been fine. But now I tell you, sell your cloak and buy a sword. And one of the disciples said, look, we have 2 swords. And showed Jesus. Jesus said, that's enough. He wasn't saying that's enough swords. He's just saying, basically, you're not getting the message. The thing that surprised me about this, and there's been lots of interpretations on what this really means. What does it mean to sell your cloak and buy a sword? The thing that surprises me is the disciples were carrying swords. And I tell you, Jesus would not have been unaware of that. So why did he even let them carry swords? And I think that's what shocks me. Okay, next slide, thanks, Gav. And of course, in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Peter drew his sword. It's probably one of those 2. And swiped, he's probably right-handed, swiped at the priest. And you can imagine the sword coming through, trying to chop his head off, and he ducked, and it slived his ear off. Jesus said, put the sword away. Put it away. If you live by that, you'll die by that. Wow. Okay, yeah, the message is pretty clear. And that Jesus went further than that. He actually healed the ear, put it back on, undid the damage. I often wonder what that individual thought after having his ear sliced off and then put back on again. Wow, could have touched up a bit, made it nicer. Anyway, okay. Next slide, thanks, Gav. And, I think because of the profundity of, you've got to remember that Christendom was born, Jesus was living in under the reign of the Roman Empire. Jews were subdued, and the Jewish community were waiting for the Messiah to come and liberate them, to rise up, overthrow the Roman Empire. The only thing they ever knew was force and violence. That's how you conquer, which is part of our human nature. And they were wanting Jesus to do the same. But so often when Jesus was challenged, is it this or is it that? He would say, it's neither of those. You're not thinking about it right. It's that one over there. It's not option A or B, it's option C. And the same thing here, the way the early church thought was, we're going to just do what we've been used to. And for the first 300 or so years, the church was largely pacifist, strongly pacifist. And there are lines of Christian thinking today, you can think of Quakers, Mennonites and so on, that are still strongly pacifist and they won't resist at all. And the question for us as individuals is, well, what do we think? How are we going to live? How do we actually work this out in a real way? Next slide, thanks, Gav. So, as my journey went on through medicine, I found myself in the military and then deploying to war zones. Why did doctors deploy to war zones? Oh, it's to save the dying and heal the sick. Yeah, that's true. What's the real reason we deploy there? It's to maintain the fighting force so that the fighting force can do the mission, which the military is just the physical enforcement arm of political will turned outwards. Does what the police force does internally. If you're a true pacifist, you won't believe in the police either. Okay, police are there to save the weak, defend the innocent, and enforce justice. The military is meant to do the same thing in a Christian military. And again, not all militaries are the same, as we've seen. So as a doctor, confronted by a number of things, A number of things. One is, the training to go to war zones is intense and lots of drilling, lots of shooting and stuff. And one of the things that I did wrestle with is the fact that two things. One is that the only place you can go without a weapon is the shower. Every other time, including when you're sleeping, you have to be armed all the time. And if you're threatened, there's no warning shots. There's no shoot them in the leg. If you draw your weapon, there's only one of two outcomes. You will be dead or they will be. No doubt about it. So as a doctor and as a Christian, I think, what does that mean? Where's this? And you're doing it over and over, so repetitious that it's now programmed at a brainstem level. And that drill, and I think it's very confronting when you start to think about it. The second thing is, standing in a trauma bay, there's 12 men, and there's a smell of blood and burnt flesh and the dust, like the dust in Afghanistan just gets, it's like talcum powder, it gets everywhere. And the men are screaming, like blood-curdling screaming, because they're in agony. They've had their legs blown off, they've got bad burns. And the smell and the sight and the sound of not just one, but many, all at the same time, is overwhelming. So for me, it's not abstract. War isn't an abstract concept. It's very, very real. And then the question is, well, what does a doctor do in a war zone? Saves the sick and injured, saves lives, and helps people recover. Yes, but that's not the main reason. In fact, that's probably not the most important reason. The most important reason you're there is to maintain the fighting efficiency of the force, including the morale, and allowing the military to do their job, which is to wreak destruction, death and destruction on the enemy. It's very confronting. So you can't hide behind the Red Cross and say, well, my hands are clean, I'm just here to save people. No, the reason you're there is to allow the military to do what they're there to do. So you can't hide from it. It's not abstract. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so that's just myself and a friend just playing. It's a bit dull on that screen, but Chinook in the background. I won't labour that point. I'll go to the next slide, thanks. So, if the first 300 years of Christendom were largely pacifist, what changed? How do we end up where we are today? The first big change was Constantine the Great, Roman emperor. His mother was a devout Christian, and he became a Christian. And he did a number of things. He was great for a number of reasons, but from one of them was the Edict of Milan, which is basically an agreement that occurred in the city of Milan, which offered Christians protection, stopped them being persecuted, and decreed by law that anything confiscated from them individually or collectively would be returned. So their property and everything that had been taken from them is done. And he extended that to other belief systems as well. And then there was a divergent theology, and the Arian bishop believed and was teaching that Jesus was a created being. He wasn't the Son of God in the sense that we think about it. So there was this controversy going that Jesus wasn't God. It was like a created entity. And so Constantine convened the Nicene Council. And from that was derived the Nicene Creed, which is the core tenets of our Christian belief. And it flowed from there, massive impact. The other thing was because the Roman Empire had now become, and basically later on, became the official state religion, now you have not individuals with a belief system, but you have an actual civilizational structure. The Roman Empire was now officially Christian. Your responsibilities as an individual versus your responsibilities as a state, as an empire, quite different. And so the Christians had to start wrestling with this. How do we live this out? Like, it's one thing to have an internal belief and turn the other, but what does it mean if you are now the emperor? We can go to the next thing. So there's a major change. That was a big change in Christendom. So basically having political responsibility, the need to defend the weak and the poor and the vulnerable. There was imperial survival. Rome had a lot of enemies, and so how do we respond? Do we just roll over, let them walk over us, or do we have to resist them? And if we're going to resist them, how do we do that? What is a Christian response to that? They wrestled with all this stuff. And then the pastoral responsibility, the soldiers and the generals and high-ranking officials wanted to know, was what they were engaged in incompatible with their Christian faith? It would have seemed that in the early church, there was no prohibition on being in the military, but it wasn't really encouraged, let's put it that way. Not only did you have to swear allegiance to the emperor, which was, there's now a conflict between who do you serve, the emperor or God, blah, blah, blah. Interestingly, in our military, as an officer, you don't swear an oath. You are asked whether you will serve, and your answer is either yes or no. Where does that come from? The Bible. Let your yes be yes or your no. You don't take an oath. Our military doesn't require it. For an officer, your yes is good enough. Wow. Okay. So next slide, thanks. Yeah. These are big, broad brushstrokes. I guess the next major thinking in terms of Christendom and war came with St. Augustine of Hippo. He was a North African bishop, and there were a lot of nasty things happening in that area, and he sought advice on how to respond to it, and he really started to think deeply about how should Christians respond to violence and conflict. And although he didn't write a theological treatise, it was a lot of observations, pastoral ministry and so on, the thinking became what served as a basis for our Christian theology on war for the next 1,500 years. Hasn't changed that much. I'll just move on to the next one. And the key ideas that Augustine put forward were there needs to be a just cause. You can't just go to war because you want to go to war because you're bored. Oh, let's go and attack the enemy, you know. It's like you can't just go because of greed, you want conquest, you want the treasures that the other people have. It has to be a just cause. The intent must be to establish peace and justice. The end result of war has to be the intent to establish peace, re-establishment of peace, the absence of conflict, and justice. There needs to be the right internal motivation at an individual level. You can't be fighting out of hatred, out of greed, out of envy, out of the desire to dominate, out of conquest, glorification, you know. All those things at a soldier level have to be as bad, okay? And it was discouraged. And the idea that Augustine really crystallized with war was a tragic necessity in a fallen world. And there was never anything glorious about it. And anyone that waged war should do so with a heavy heart. It's tragic. And basically the underlying principle there too is that love sometimes requires forceful action to protect the innocent and prevent greater evil. Okay, next slide. Augustine's work was built on by Thomas Aquinas, who wrote Summa Theologica, which some people interpret as the sum of all theology, which is a pretty ambitious title. It wasn't really meant that, and he really wrestled with it and framed up the theological and philosophical foundations, which has become the basis of our international law. It's Christian. Did you know that? And really detailed the necessary conditions to fight, and that it needs to be a legitimate authority. It's not individual personal conflict. It's at a national governmental type level. There needs to be a just cause. You can't do it just because you want to conquer the next country or take their treasure. It has to be just reasons. The right intention, that's that internal things, and then it was later expanded that it has to be last resort. You've exhausted all other possibilities, negotiation, whatever, and non-futile. There's no point starting a war if there's no way you can win it. All you're going to do is cause more death and suffering. and it has to be proportional, not disproportionate. Each of those things we could delve into in great detail. We don't have time. I'm conscious, Ed, I'm sorry I've run over time, but I still would like to do the thing. Is that okay? Yeah. Are you guys all right with that? Yeah. So that's, very big brushstrokes on a very complex topic. But I hope that what you take away is that we come to a legitimate understanding of why we need to engage in war, why we have armies, how it's been thought through from a Christian point of view. You can still adopt the personal point of view saying, I'm going to be completely pacifist, which also means that you won't protect anyone that's being attacked, that you won't stand up to evil, that you won't defend what's right to defend. That's your choice. You stand before God and answer for that. But for the majority of Christians, that's not an acceptable thing. And so I hope that's sort of been interesting. So the talk I gave yesterday morning, reflection, encapsulate, you'll see this come through in the talk, but I never talked about God per se. And it was really reflecting on our Anzac Day and the Anzacs. And I titled it, Lest We Forget. Forget what? When you walk past a war memorial, do you ever pause to think about what it represents? Simply a list of names from some distant time and faraway place? A societal salute of gratitude to those fallen for us in battle? A glorification of war? An uncomfortable reminder of our capacity for astonishing barbarity towards each other? Maybe for you, all of those things, or none of those things. For me, at the heart of it, when all is said and done, it's a powerful reminder there are some things that should be so important to us that they're worth an enormous cost in terms of effort, treasure, and shattered lives. Things we often take for granted, such as peace, liberty, and the absence of tyranny. That raises the obvious questions for all of us today. What things really matter to us? And where are our lines in the sand, our points of no compromise? What do we live for? And what would we be willing to die for? Early yesterday morning, 111 years ago, Anzacs marched ashore in what was then the Near East, now part of Europe, to engage in a war that was to profoundly influence how we came to view ourselves and our place in this world. Astonishingly, 111 years later, our military is still engaged in the Middle East. If history is any guide, it's possible that we'll still be there fighting or peacekeeping 100 years from now. So it won't be our children over there, it will be our children's children's children. Think about that for a moment. Between 1914 and 1918, when Australia's population was around 4.9 million, 39% of eligible men aged between 18 and 44 enlisted in the armed forces. Of those, just over 330,000 served overseas, and about half, 155,000, were wounded, and nearly 60,000 died. Let me translate those numbers into equivalent figures today. As of 2024, the latest available published data, the Australian population numbered 27.4 million people, with about 5.2 million of those being men aged 18 to 44. Now imagine the impact on our national psyche if over 250,000 of those men died, and over 740,000 returned home wounded. To put it in a more accessible way, 1 in 18 of all Australia's men aged 18 to 44 would die, and 1 in 7 would be wounded. Not one person in this country would remain untouched in a very profound and personal way, and searching questions about what it all meant, why we did it, and if it was worth the cost, would certainly come thick and fast. Other nations, including New Zealand, were similarly affected by grievous losses, No wonder we joined the rest of the world and recoiled in horror at the obscenity of World War I, declaring it the war to end all wars. But unfortunately, it wasn't. The sad reality is that the last century has been the most violent in human history. Man against fellow man, revolutions and wars, unspeakable atrocities, literally hundreds of millions of people damaged or dead. Not just statistics, but fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, uncles and aunts, family, us. So what did our forebears fight for, not just in World War I, but in the many conflicts since? What drove them to take up arms and participate in extreme violence? Why were they willing to sacrifice so much, including their own lives, if necessary? I guess no single or simple answer will suffice, but those are questions we should all ponder. Regardless of our answers, I for one am pleased they did. Because of their sacrifice, my family and I can enjoy the life we do today in this wonderful country. It has been said that the spirit of the Anzacs gave birth to this nation. Indeed, in 1915, the poet Banjo Paterson wrote his poem, We're All Australian Now, and included the verse, the metal that a race can show is proved with shot and steel, and now we know what nations know and feel what nations feel. Subsequently, Australia's official war historian Charles Bean wrote, Anzac stood and still stands for reckless valour in a good cause, for enterprise, resourcefulness, fidelity, comradeship, and endurance that will never own defeat. These sentiments came to be seen as representing the type of people we are, our national character, so to speak. Our core beliefs and values are what hold us together, united as one people, Australians. They give us anchor and direction in a violent and uncertain world. We live in an increasingly post-Christian West. Postmodern relativistic thinking is rapidly becoming the norm. This understandably leads many to abandon any concept of absolute truth, particularly with respect to moral, ethical, and other values and acceptable behaviours. In fact, some would adamantly declare that there are no absolutes. Of course, the thinking person is then inclined to ask if that can be declared absolutely. Of course, moreover, if there are no truths in any real sense, there can be no lies. We then quickly move away from being able to judge something as right or wrong and good or evil, but merely as relative. We can no longer... And sadly, that is a question I hear with increasing frequency. We need truth rather than relativity to undergird our sense of nationhood, of the values we're prepared to defend, not only with our time and treasure, but also, if necessary, with our very lives. Worldviews matter. Our beliefs and how we live them are not simply abstract notions, but have a very real and profound effect on the type of society we create, how we live, and indeed, the type of future that awaits us. Worldviews can and do clash, often with dreadful consequences, as we are witnessing both overseas and within Australia today. In this country, we are blessed with relative peace and safety, a huge degree of personal liberty, and the ability to engage in productive activity. We realise that all the military might in the world cannot change a person's heart. Concepts like love, grace, mercy, forgiveness, the value of life, freedom of choice, and caring for one another don't arise from the barrel of a gun. We have to look elsewhere for the foundations on which to build. And in Australia, that foundation is our strong Judeo-Christian heritage. I believe a major challenge we now face within Australia is how we manage groups that have very different, sometimes seriously conflicting worldviews. Multiculturalism can provide our society with a richness and a celebration of life that comes from the diversity of human heritage and its cultural expressions. However, there are also risks. Potential exists for the fragmentation and loss of common core values, the very glue that holds our nation together. I believe that it's axiomatic that each of us needs to know what we believe and why we believe it, or we will be led or victimized by those that do. Let me repeat that because it's so foundational and so important. We need to know what we believe and why we believe it, or we'll be led or victimized by those that do. There's no middle or passive ground on that. Today, or yesterday, Anzac Day, we should remember not just those who sacrificed so much for us, but why they did it. Yesterday is the day to reflect on our core beliefs and values, and importantly, the actions that flow from them. It's time to think about the things that are worth living for, even dying for. Lest we forget is an age-old phrase that you'll hear repeatedly. However, its clarion call is profound. So at the going down of the sun and in the morning, we should not only remember and honour those who gave all, we should remember the values they fought for and the enormous gift they bequeathed us. Their actions cemented the values underpinning our very sense of nationhood. Their gift to us is ours to lose, lest we forget.
Let's stand and give Dave a hand clap of appreciation. Thank you, Dave. That was so good. Yeah, that was so good. Thank you so much. Dave usually hangs around for a while, so feel free to have a chat with him. And what a wonderful, well thought out, a lot of thought, not just because he knew he was going to be talking at Anzac Day yesterday or to us this morning, but I know having probably 100 conversations at least with Dave in the living room, these things are well thought out. And I really encourage you, think it out. Have a worldview that includes war. Have a worldview so that we can see the gospel and the consequences of other worldviews that are contrary to the gospel not prevail in this great country. We need to have our thoughts well thought out, and I'm so appreciative, Dave, that you did, and I'm sure so many of us have also thought these things out, and take the time to do that because we have a brain. We don't throw it away as Christians, and God, as Dave said, is so interested not just in the spiritual, but he's interested in all of life, in all of our lives. And so don't just have an opinion, have a view that lines up with God and the kingdom of God. I want to pray for you right now before we go. And I want to give you a chance, and we do this every week, to ask Jesus Christ to come into your heart. Only God can change a human heart. Only God can save humanity. There's no army that's going to do it or anything else. Only God can do that. And it starts with a decision, a personal decision, to ask Jesus Christ to come into your heart and a repentance, a turning away from ruling your own life in a way doesn't line up with God. So let's just pray right now. And I'm going to pray. We can all pray together. Say, Dear God, I thank you for sending your only Son into this world, for this world, including me. Jesus, I turn from my ways to your way. Jesus, I give you my heart. Amen.